Is this the beginning of a shocking Days of Our Lives exit, or just the calm before Kristen DiMera's next storm? Because right now, fans are asking one huge question. With Stacy Haiduk suddenly back on The Young and the Restless as Patty Williams, is Days quietly pushing Kristen out of Salem? Or is this one of those classic soap fake-outs where a character disappears just long enough to make the comeback even bigger? Let's start with the real reason fans are so unsettled by this news. Kristen DiMera is not just another recurring character who can quietly drift off the canvas without anyone noticing. She is one of the most dangerous and unpredictable forces in Salem. Whenever Kristen appears, she brings instant tension with her secrets, manipulation, emotional blackmail, revenge, and the constant feeling that someone's life is about to be turned upside down. That is why Stacy Haiduk's sudden return to The Young and the Restless hit Days of Our Lives viewers so hard. The moment fans saw her reappear as Patty Williams, a role she had not played in a decade, the alarm bells started ringing. For many viewers, the question came instantly: is this a side project, or a warning sign? Is Stacy simply doing a short-term visit on another soap, or is Days quietly stepping away from Kristen? And honestly, that fear did not come out of nowhere. Soap fans know how this works. Sometimes a casting shake-up really is temporary. Sometimes an actor pops over to another show and everything goes back to normal. But other times, it signals something bigger behind the scenes. A shift in priorities, a character being cooled off, or a gradual move away from someone who used to be central to the drama. That is why this story feels bigger than just one actress booking another role. It hits a nerve because Kristen is not a character viewers see as expendable. She is too important to the emotional chaos of Salem. She is the kind of character who can destroy a relationship, hijack a family crisis, and completely change the direction of a storyline with one look, one lie, or one chilling threat. If Kristen were truly being pushed aside, Salem would not just lose a villain. It would lose one of its most electric sources of tension. And that is exactly why fans are panicking. Now here is where the story becomes more layered, and much more interesting. Because when Stacy Haiduk spoke about her current status, she did not sound like someone who had slammed the door on Days of Our Lives. She did not sound angry. She did not sound bitter. And she definitely did not sound like someone trying to distance herself from Kristen or Susan. In fact, her comments pointed in the opposite direction. She openly admitted that she was disappointed when Days put her characters on pause earlier this year. And that is important, because it reveals something very specific. This is not an actress walking away from the show by choice. This is an actress who still feels deeply connected to the series, still loves the characters, and still wants to be there. That changes the entire tone of the story. Because now the issue is no longer, does Stacy want out? The real question becomes, why isn't Days using her more? And that is a much more dramatic possibility. Haiduk also made it clear that if the opportunity came up, she would absolutely return. That one statement speaks volumes. It tells fans that the door is still open. Kristen is not being written off with finality. Susan is not being erased forever. Stacy herself is not treating this like a goodbye. Instead, what we are looking at may be a frustrating in-between phase. The kind of soap limbo where a beloved actress is willing, available, and eager. But the show has temporarily shifted its focus elsewhere. And for fans, that can be just as unsettling as an actual exit. Because sometimes a character is not killed off. Sometimes they are not given a dramatic farewell. Sometimes they are simply used less and less until viewers begin to feel their absence before the show ever says a word. That is why Stacy's comments matter so much. They suggest that the instability here may not be coming from her. It may be coming from the show itself. So now we get to the biggest question of all. Is Kristen really being removed from Days of Our Lives? At this point, the most accurate answer is no, not officially. But that does not mean fans are wrong to be worried. Because in soaps, a character does not have to vanish overnight for the danger to be real. Yes, Stacy Haiduk can still be seen on days for quite a while because the show tapes so far in advance. That means Kristen and Susan are not about to disappear instantly. Viewers are not waking up tomorrow to find a sudden, on-screen exit with no warning. The material already filmed gives the show a cushion. But that cushion is exactly what makes the situation tricky. Because it can create the illusion that everything is fine, even while the long-term future remains uncertain. And that is where the real concern begins. If Kristen and Susan have already been slowed down creatively, then fans have every reason to wonder what happens when that pre-taped material finally runs out. Does Kristen return to the center of the action where she belongs? Does Susan continue popping up as one of Salem's strangest and most entertaining forces? Or do both characters slowly fade into occasional appearances while the show moves on without them? That kind of shift can be more damaging than a dramatic exit. Because at least a big farewell gives a character importance. A quiet reduction does not. It turns a once powerful player into background noise. And that is the nightmare scenario for Kristen fans. Not a loud, explosive goodbye. Not a shocking death. Not a final confrontation. But a slow creative fade, fewer scenes, less impact, shorter arcs, smaller stakes. A character who once drove fear and chaos across Salem suddenly reduced to brief appearances that no longer carry the same power. If that is the direction Days is heading, then Kristen may not be getting removed in one brutal moment. She may be getting pushed aside little by little. And sometimes, that kind of erasure feels even worse. But here is the twist that may make this whole situation even more exciting for fans. What if this is not the end of Kristen at all? What if this temporary pullback is actually setting up something much bigger? Because Kristen DiMera is not a character who works best in the background. She works best when she is cornered, obsessed, furious, and ready to strike. She needs a motive. She needs emotional fuel. She needs someone to blame, someone to manipulate, or someone she feels she has to get back. That is when Kristen becomes truly dangerous. So if Days of Our Lives has taken a step back from her for now, maybe that is not a sign they are done with her. Maybe it is the opposite. Maybe they are holding her back until the story is ready for maximum impact. And if that is what they are doing, then Kristen's next return could hit Salem like a shockwave. Because a quieter absence can actually make a villain more powerful. It creates anticipation. It builds curiosity. It gives viewers time to wonder what she is doing off-screen, what she is planning, and who is going to pay the price when she resurfaces. And let's be honest, Kristen is the kind of character who should never return softly. She should come back with purpose. She should come back angry. She should come back with a target. Just picture the scene. A tense conversation is already underway. Someone thinks the crisis is finally over. Then the door opens. The room goes still. Kristen steps inside, her expression cold, her voice calm, and says something like, "You really thought this was over?" That is the kind of entrance Kristen was made for. And that is why so many fans are not ready to believe this is goodbye. Because if Kristen returns with the right storyline, this pause may not weaken her at all. It may make her more explosive than ever. And then there is the other major reason this situation is not so simple. Stacy Haiduk is not only playing Kristen. She is also Susan Banks. And that changes everything. Because Susan brings an entirely different type of value to Days of Our Lives. Where Kristen brings danger, manipulation, and emotional warfare, Susan brings unpredictability, intuition, strange energy, and the kind of chaotic presence that can shift the tone of a storyline in seconds. She is not a villain in the same way Kristen is. But she is absolutely a character who matters. Susan can wander into a scene and suddenly make it feel eerie, emotional, funny, uncomfortable, or deeply significant all at once. She can deliver warnings. She can sense trouble. She can stir fear without even meaning to. And in Salem, that kind of character is useful in ways that go far beyond one storyline. That is what makes Haiduk so valuable. She does not only give the show one powerful persona. She gives it two completely different forces. One can terrorize a room. The other can unsettle it. One can ignite revenge. The other can foreshadow disaster. Very few performers bring that kind of flexibility. And that is why this does not feel like a clean or simple exit story. If Days is not using Kristen heavily at one moment, Susan can still slide into the canvas in a totally different way. If Susan is quiet for a while, Kristen can always explode back into the center of the drama. That kind of range gives the show options. And when a performer gives a soap that many options, it becomes much harder to believe the door is really closed. Which is why this situation still feels unsettled. Not final, not safe, not resolved, just uncertain. And in soap storytelling, uncertainty is often where the real drama begins. So after all of this, what is the real takeaway? The first thing fans should understand is that the panic makes sense. When a familiar actress suddenly reappears on another soap, and when her major characters on Days are not being pushed as heavily as before, viewers are naturally going to fear the worst. But based on everything that has been said so far, this does not look like a confirmed permanent goodbye. At the same time, that does not mean fans should completely relax. Because in daytime, the biggest changes do not always arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes there is no huge farewell, no shocking death, no final confrontation, and no official moment that tells viewers everything has changed. Sometimes the shift is quieter than that. A character gets fewer scenes. Then fewer story-driving moments. Then fewer emotional stakes. And eventually, viewers realize someone who used to feel essential no longer feels central. That may be the real fear here. Not that Kristen DiMera is being erased in one dramatic blow, but that she could slowly stop mattering in the way she once did. And for a character like Kristen, that would be a huge loss. Because Kristen is not supposed to feel optional. She is supposed to feel dangerous. She is supposed to disrupt lives, divide families, create panic, and keep people guessing. Susan, in her own completely different way, is also supposed to leave an impact every time she appears. If Days of Our Lives stops using Stacy Haiduk to that full potential, it is not just losing screen time for one actress. It is losing a specific kind of energy. The menace, the weirdness, the unpredictability, the ability to make a scene feel unhinged one second and emotionally loaded the next. That is not a minor adjustment. That is a shift in the balance of Salem itself. So maybe the biggest question is no longer, is Stacy Haiduk leaving Days? Maybe the more important question is this. Is DOOL making a huge mistake by not putting Kristen and Susan where they belong, right in the middle of the chaos? Because if the answer is yes, fans are going to feel that absence long before the show ever says it out loud. So what do you think? Is this only a temporary detour while Stacy Haiduk enjoys a juicy return to Y&R? Or is Days of Our Lives quietly pushing Kristen toward the sidelines? And if Kristen does come back in a major way, who should be her first target? Because one thing is certain, in Salem, characters like Kristen never stay buried for long. If you want, I can also turn this into a stronger YouTube version with timestamped sections, a more explosive first 15-second hook, and 3 thumbnail title options.